we have any apologies for absence? I know Councillor Roseman cannot attend for the pressure work. And currently we are missing Councillor Cook, Councillor Hinton, and right. And we're waiting Jackie and Rebecca, whom we think will be slightly late. So, are there any declarations of interest? No. Public participation? Any questions from the public?
No, we haven't received any. No.
Okay, shall we then move quickly on to the minutes? Are there any comments on the minutes as they stand? No?
We accept those.
Okay, thank you. What I should say in terms of communications, there has been a climate emergency working group annual report published. I'm not certain how far it's been circulated. And has that gone to the councillors as well?
I'm not sure, but I certainly can send it.
If you could. And then it might be sensible to forward it also to local press if you want to. We then come on to the progress report. And in that respect, we've got the tree strategy later in the agenda.
Yes, and I've got a bit of an update on the communications plan and parishes events.
Okay,
When you're ready.
so let's go through. Council carbon footprint. Just quickly, the intention is that these will be, the carbon footprint will be split by the committees. Are you able to do that before you leave?
Yes, I'll get that, the final figures. At the last meeting, you saw a report and we concluded that the total emissions of the council is about 150 tonnes, but you asked me to do a little bit of further work on the emissions arising from water and waste, and to specify who the bill payers were for the bills at the council's key properties. I haven't finished that work yet, but I will do that before the 13th of April. So you'll have it before I leave.
Excellent. Right. The RCEF building decarbonisation is on the agenda. Eco Business Fair. This is not going to proceed, but are there any comments on it in terms of linking with Greenham?
That was what I was just talking to Kath about. So, reporting to the meeting, Greenham are very keen to run with a Great Big Green Week and to do a lot more, engaging with more people, and maybe adding in businesses. You know, we're really very open to increase the scope of it. What we'd like to do is to discuss with the town council who would want to get involved from the town council and how would they want to get involved. And also we want to talk with the town council about resources, specifically about rental of the marketplace, because we think that having a full marketplace, you know, with stalls all the way up on a Saturday or one of the weekends would be a great sign, you know, to show that the town council is really serious about the work of this committee. So that's a report back from you. Is that realistic? Is that pretty much?
So you're waiting on the town council?
No. And what we wanted to do is to engage with the town council, and so I would like.
That known as an entanglement.
And as a first step, I'd like to talk with Kath and Sheridan about just how we do that and which are the appropriate committees, and then we can approach them and work with the committee.
Kath, do you have any comment at this stage, or do you wish to consider it?
Consider that, discuss with Fiona and Sheridan.
Okay, great.
Come back to Patrick.
All right.
Thank you very much indeed.
There's a point about Gillett School and drafting a letter by Claudia. Hasn't happened. I'm still in discussion with the village school around the subject of solar panels. Communications plan, this is the point about the mini annual report, which has been produced and circulated. As I said earlier, perhaps can go to the councillors if they haven't received already. We have comments about the transport projects. Is that relevant to this committee?
I've got a little bit more on the communications plan.
Okay.
So at your request, I sent a mini report to South Oxfordshire parishes to gauge their interest in having an event later in the year. Tame Town Council are very keen and have 3 to 5 people who definitely want to attend such an event, and 2 other councils, Stoke and Highmore, have expressed an interest in sending at least one representative. So that seems like quite a positive response, particularly from Tame. So I wanted to suggest perhaps we should ask Tame to form a joint organising committee and try and organise it jointly with them, given that they're so keen and seem to be quite well resourced in this regard.
We know Tame well. I've been involved in. I used to be chair of the regional chair of the Royal Society of Arts and whatever. And they formed their climate emergency group as a result of something I've been talking to them about probably 5 or 6 years ago. And they're probably the most advanced, I think, of the councils around here. Certainly when we had the discussion with the parish councils probably 2 years ago now, they were much more active and involved.
They had a green living document, didn't they?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So is there anything to say about the transport, which I suspect is for the transport strategy group?
That's really for your information, because so that you're aware of where things are up to with electric vehicles and other projects that sort of have some overlap.
We added in to this progress report on the agenda. Committee members may wish to comment on the effectiveness of the programme and projects in meeting the council's net zero by 2030 policy goals, including setting annual targets and making suggestions for ensuring the policy goals are achieved. I have some suggestions. The net zero policy is probably great as far as it goes. There's nothing in there. It talks about the processes, but there's nothing in there about the delivery and the progress. And I'm not certain who actually within the council is responsible for the net zero policy in terms of achieving it by the year 2030. Now, it might be finance, strategy and management, or it might be planning, or it might be recreation communities, or it might be town and community. But in their absence, what I think I'd like to suggest is that, first of all, Fiona will complete this split of the carbon footprint by the committees, and that'll be available by about midnight on the 13th of April, I suspect. But then we ask the committees, chairs, and also their officers to set an annual target, which will be reviewed every year. So it's not a fixed target. Identify actions which they plan to introduce to deliver or to go towards delivering a net zero policy. And then what I think they should do is submit, say, a quarterly report on their activities in terms of achieving net zero to this group. And then we act as a reviewer for the council as a whole. The question I then have is to whom, which committee would actually take responsibility for saying you're doing very well or you're not doing very well. I don't think it's for this group to smack his or her hands and say you're a naughty girl and a naughty boy. I think it's really much more about the council having the ability to review what the progress is and deciding what actions need to be taken. In that respect, I'm not certain whether submitting it to the planning committee is the right. I think personally, because planning is much more about external matters, I think probably it's more likely it should go to the finance, strategy and management group. You know? But I'd be willing to take any views that are forthcoming. First of all, on the suggested approach, and then to whom it is reported. Councillor Arlott, do you have any views?
Other than shaking my head. Yeah, I think you when you started your speech, you mentioned all 4 committees. So eventually it would go to full council, and I think it would then be up to the full council to say, you know, planning, you're not doing enough, or town and community, you're not doing enough. So that would be my view.
That's Fiona and I did discuss this briefly earlier, didn't we? And we thought probably it just really needs to go to full council. I mean, obviously CWG reports to planning, and then but from there I think it needs to go to full council, but not in the way that planning minutes would normally go to full council. It would need to go probably as a report to full council.
Yeah, I think particularly at this stage where it's a new project for the council, that would be the best way to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, we can discuss it with Sheridan, but that seems logical to me, just because it affects each committee individually, and it's very time consuming if you go around each committee and you're waiting for a meeting on the cycle for each committee, whereas if you go to full council, you just get everyone at once.
So the question I have for people who are putting their fingers up in the air, because this will have to involve extra work for us. So do you have any comments? Perhaps Jackie, you may have.
Not on the extra work yet, I'm thinking about that. But if it goes straight to full council, does that mean when it does, there needs to be some representative from this working group? Because otherwise, who would present it? Yeah.
I suppose ideally.
Any other views, any thoughts, any criticisms, alternatives?
My thought is that if you can get the buy-in of all the 4 committees, then yes, and planning have got to agree that we are going to leapfrog effectively over, because normally they would have a chance to review our as a working group and then put forward to full council. So actually we're sort of bypassing that, aren't we? Obviously we want to have this as a separate agenda item, not as just part of the minutes, so it steps outside of just agreeing the planning minutes. It would be a separate agenda item, but still I think that ideally the head of planning, the chair of planning would be the person to take this to formally take this to full council, and that there would be representatives of the climate working group on hand to give technical input, and that would be the right way of doing it. So the sort of legal way, the legal sort of steps are that the chair of planning takes this report as a separate agenda item to full council, and then we stand by, sit in the cross benches, and wait for our turn for us.
But the issue I have with that is that
it's marking your own homework.
Well, no, not that. It's just that I'm not confident, and I'm being honest in this respect, that the level of knowledge is sufficient in members of the planning committee to actually take the discussion forward.
I think I'm inclined to agree, but thinking of who the chair of planning is now, whether they will be chair of planning next year is another matter.
Probably fall to the deputy. Probably fall to the deputy is another role.
Yeah,
But he may not be deputy next year.
no, it all gets shaken up, all comes down on sticks in May. So I think we do need to think it through. So
I was going to say, I don't know that somebody on the planning committee would necessarily feel they had sufficient background, having not been involved in all the debates that got to that point, to be able to present it. My advice would be that sort of with change management kind of projects of this type, you're better off having somebody who's been more immersed in it
yes,
from an earlier stage. So
I'd agree with that. It's a constitutional issue as to how the council, full council and the committees are constituted. We don't want to break that, but equally, I think if you've got a good chair, they can immediately defer to someone from the working group to give the technical presentation.
Okay.
I mean, constitutionally, I would say the planning committee's job is to note that the climate emergency working group has done the job that it said it would needed to do, but recognise that this was a high level strategic decision that the council needed to make.
Yes.
So that would be, so I don't think anyone would be going over the heads of the planning team, we'd just be asking them to note that the work had been done and let the full council consider the bigger strategic issues.
Before you comment, I'm going to update Kelly and Rebecca. Rebecca, as you've just come in, you've been nominated to present.
Well, no, Kelly, as councillor, as the last person in.
I did have a list for charities meeting, which two of you entered, which was quite funny.
Yeah, I know. So we're on the item agenda 5, and we've gone through the progress of what the working group has been discussing. We then went on to talk about net zero by 2030, and I suggested that the net zero policy as it stands is short on delivery. And in fact, I asked who was the body within the council that would take responsibility for challenging it. And what I suggested was that each of the committee chairs and their relevant officers should set an annual target for emissions reduction. And that with that would go actions that should be implemented during that year, and that on a quarterly basis, those committees would submit a progress report to this working group, and we would review it on behalf of the council. I had a question about to which committee it should go, and the conclusion, I believe, was that it should go to the full council, rather than actually just going to planning and or finance strategy and management committee. And then there was a discussion about how it should be handled, whether it should be the planning chair who presents it to the full council, or whether it should be another individual. At that stage, you had your finger up.
Yeah, if you look at your last minutes, there's really not a lot said, is there? So we then go on to the progress, which we're obviously discussing now. But these go to the planning committee and they just nod them through. They don't discuss, am I wrong or right?
No, you're right.
Yeah. So basically what the planning committee say, yeah, absolutely brilliant working group, doing a great job, just carry on doing it. So what you're saying is you need to, a lot of these, which they probably are, need to delegate some of these items of your progress to certain committees, but they're coming back and saying, well, no, we're happy with what you're doing. You just carry on doing it.
I agree entirely on that.
And that's what's happened, I believe, up to date.
Yeah, and what will not happen will be that the council will not achieve net zero by 2030, because there isn't a delivery mechanism to ensure that the various committees are taking the right decisions to reduce the emissions. And it's not just about electricity. It could be things like what fertilizers are being used by park services, could be about the waste disposal and so forth. And Fiona and I have met with the officers in each of those committees to talk about the areas that they could actually contribute. And that's what is driving us in terms of looking at the carbon footprint.
Does anybody really know where net zero is?
Well, when we started, we challenged Sheridan if he knew what the carbon footprint of the council was. And the answer is no. We've now got to the stage of identifying the carbon footprint. Net zero could be part of tree strategy, for example. It could also be part of decarbonisation. And it could be just changing the way in which you're working dramatically. But what we need to do is to get each of the committees to consider what they could and should do. And we've got 8 years. I mean, personally, I think net zero by 2030. But that was what was set.
Yeah, the net zero by 2030 is a change from our original mission statement, which was that there would be plans in place by 2030 for that aim.
But the council has set a policy.
Yeah, but that's right. There was an amendment tabled, I think, in Riceman, and it was voted on by the full council, and it was passed. And so I think that's the task we've been given, and that's the task we should give back to the full council, to council, to all the committees. And let's see where we get to. I'd much rather get halfway towards a goal, which is a stretch goal, than to set ourselves a nice easy goal.
Yeah.
And toddle along and get to within 89% of it. I think that it's actually quite a good strategy, because it gets you really thinking about all of the things that you do, not just a few. So you're tinkering with this and tinkering with that.
But personally, I think we have not a hope in hell of reaching net zero by 2030. It's 20 years ahead of the government's own policy. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do everything that we possibly can. And so much of it will be dependent on government policy. So, we can do what we can here, but we are dependent on sort of national and international policy. But I don't think that we can deliver net zero by 2030 personally. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do all that we possibly can.
Patrick,
could I put it in perspective? 150 tonnes. Each of us has a carbon footprint, depending on whether you look at scope 2 or scope 3, of between 9 and 13 tonnes. So we're only talking about the carbon footprint of about 15 people. There are how many residents? 10,000 of us in Henley. So for the town council to meet net zero, I think is achievable potentially if we tackle it now over 8 years.
Sorry. So are we saying the town council, or are we saying Henley as a town?
council.
Okay, so that is different.
Yeah, that makes it. If you think about that, I think if you think about the area of roofs that we have, or the buildings and also the finance. To be honest, not everyone has that much capital stacked away in the bank, and so there are ways and means. Whether the council is happy to do it or not is another matter, and whether they should do it or not is another matter. But I think it can be achieved with the resources that the town council has now. But it's up to us, and I think what Tony is saying is really very good, because what it's doing is giving accountability. Yeah, it's good because it's giving people accountability for the bit that they've got influence over. So parks have got influence over the work that they do. There's all the other committees that got influence. Finance have got influence over investments and so on. There are all sorts of people have their spheres of influence. And if you can focus down on those and they concentrate on those, I think they can achieve something.
Councillor Arlett. Sorry, I thought you.
No,
Okay.
Jackie.
Yeah, I think for that to work, however, I think everybody involved would need to really understand, and for it to be clear what that means and what it is that they have to do to reach that. Otherwise, you're just going to get to that point and it will be a failure, which I think is equally
It's dangerous.
as dangerous. So I think it, for me, I think this needs to be revisited. And it needs to be confirmed that that is the policy,
It has been confirmed.
reconfirmed, in line with knowing exactly what we have to do to achieve. Because I think if the policy's been made, but I'm not sure it's clear what that policy is in terms of how it's achieved. You've got a policy, but you haven't got the detail within it.
I think that's a very good point that you're making. I mean, that there's strategy, but strategy on its own is just a vision, a nice vision. It doesn't mean anything until you say how you're going to do it.
I'm the same, you know, to be honest, if I'm going to do something, I need to know what I'm meant to do and then how to deliver it. You know, is it going to take me 2 weeks, 2 months, 3 months? And you just obviously set yourself a program and off you go. I'm not seeing that there. I've got no program at all which I'm working to.
Yeah, that's a completely fair point, but that's kind of the nature of the beast, that there isn't a town council out there that's worked out how to do this. Otherwise, I'd be all over them like a rash, you know, and bring that information back to you. But we're being pioneers. So what Henry is doing is having vision and a bit of courage, perhaps to show leadership in this area, recognising the importance of the challenge being faced. And where we hit obstacles that mean that we won't perhaps deliver our vision, well, that in its is useful information. If we discover that, I don't know, the Oxfordshire electric vehicle strategy is restricting our ability to deliver in some way, perhaps, then we can go back to Oxfordshire and say in much greater detail what their policies and strategies mean for what we're trying to achieve. We can't really have that conversation with them at the moment because we haven't tried to do all of those things ourselves. So I think it's, you know, working on carbon reduction strategy is quite different from a lot of the other kind of projects that the council has, because it is new. We're trying to invent a new way of living without carbon, which nobody knows how to do yet. But you know, we have to be confident that we'll get there and we can lead the way.
Patrick.
Yeah, I think what I really like about what you're I'll just say again, is the annual target. And rather than going back and reviewing, stepping back and going through another year of deliberation about the whole plan, we do it as what's called an agile approach of development of a project, is that you set annual targets, see how close you get to them or whether you overshoot them, and decide then on what your annual targets are going to be for the following year, and decide whether you're actually even going in the right direction. But it gives you 1 year's prototyping of it, whilst you're doing some of the right things to get on. And then we've got 8 years, we've got 8 iterations to go to get there. And I think, you know, what will happen, I hope, is that as we learn along the way, and we do an analysis each year, and that's the responsibility of this committee, this working group, is to do that analysis and to help the committees to set their annual targets for the following year, and help them with what they can look at as well, because they won't know. We won't know to start off with, but we'll all learn as we go along. And it's how software development is now done, because projects are so huge that no one knows how it's going to pan out. There's been some horrendous failures in software. But using an agile approach of iterating and doing an annual iteration of setting targets, trying to achieve those targets, identifying successes, identifying failures, and then going on again, going for another year, is a much more proactive, forward-looking approach.
Sure.
I completely support that. It's kind of what I was starting to
Yeah.
get to, and I was going to just only to add on, to go back to what your idea was on how this would be reported, and going to full council and so on. I think this could be part of how you fill in that policy, is the reporting system itself, which is really what you were saying. And I think to do that, we should go back to looking at, if it goes to full council without going through planning, that somebody with the right knowledge from this group is a representative at full council.
Just a quick one, talking about measuring this, how we're going to measure what we're achieving. I just wrote down there, we're putting 6 EV points down here, 6 in Kings Road, 4 at Mill Meadows. But what is that achieving? Do we need 12 there and 8 at Mill Meadows?
Probably do.
Well, I don't know. What is there a figure that we are looking at by 2030?
We know what the Henley's pro rata carbon footprint is, based on what SDC has. We can identify that and split it out. But the reality is that what we can do, the data for each of these aspects of carbon emissions is been available for a lot of years. I've been doing carbon footprints for about 15 years, I suppose. But it's advanced a lot. So when I started doing it, it was just electricity and gas. Now it's about the supply chain as well. And what I would say is that I think what we've done with each of the committee officers is actually talk it through them. I don't think they'll be able to identify what they should do as an annual target without more talking through them. Because I think that's part of our role, is actually to help them decide what can be done. And I think that's a requirement on us as a working group to do. What we found was, when we talked with them, that it's not something they'd been involved with ever before. And as a consequence, we can't just say, right, set an annual target, because frankly, we know crap. We have a role. If I wouldn't wish to go back from a policy which says net zero by 2030. I think we're where we're at. But I think we have a responsibility, not just to the committee officers, but even the town clerk and the deputy town clerk, to help them understand what it is about and work through. And the first year would be a hard year for them and for us.
How do we know, what we're measuring is actually real and not just waffle? So, for example, we recently had a planning application come for plans, and as part of that, one of the car club people came along and they said, right, each car takes 34 cars off the road. Each car club car takes 34 cars off the road. So they said, we want 2 more car club spots here with 2 more car clubs in, which could take up to 68 more cars off the road. There's some people, you've got ladies down at Drifters, they use it and they do their run around in it, and they've said, well, it's not just buying a car. So actually, great, yeah, there's one that's taken off the road. But then somebody else I know uses it because they couldn't afford a second car, or have no intention of buying a second car, but it's made managing the one car they do have already a little bit easier between the couple.
Okay,
so, how do we know?
Let me explain. The data you use is carbon emissions per kilowatt hour, carbon emissions per pound of fertilizer, for example. And you're using data based on how you operate, not on how you might operate in the future. And it's all science-based. That doesn't mean anything nowadays. But
no, say we, Henley Town Council, for example, in this, just using the time, we're not saying we're going to, but say we decided, right, well, we're going to cut our emissions down by purchasing 5 car club cars, because that's going to get 150 odd.
It wouldn't be. You'd say, if you purchased electric cars, you'd be comparing with what the cars you have currently, not what it might do in terms of changing.
Oh, right, now I see what you mean. So it's whether we change our electric vehicles, which don't exist for what cars use them for, but when they do, we'll be on it. And not what.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is based on the data you've got, operational data. So it's all related to how you're operating, and that is where the complexity of setting a net zero policy comes, because you don't just say, oh, we're going to reduce emissions. You've got to say, we're going to operate differently. And that is a big challenge. And the companies I deal with, it's a nightmare. Particularly so when you've got international operations, you know, because they don't all see the same. And that's what I'm saying, you know, there's an educational task on this working group to help the officers in the council understand what have they've got currently and what could they do differently. And we don't have the answers. It comes back to them, to be honest, but we need to explain what are the options. Sorry.
Yes, I wanted to say, I think we've based the figures we've got on some robust data. So for example, the committees can get access to the energy data, you know, how much of the energy bill, so the finance team can provide us all with the kilowatt hours and the cost of that energy. Now that's slightly difficult for people to do because they're not used to looking at that data, you know, by committee. But that, you know, we know what those bills are, so we can do that. So we're having to work out how to do it. It is a bit new, but it's a very robust figure because you know the meter reading doesn't lie. So you know we're not basing it on speculation or theory. It's based on the bills that go through the finance committee on the whole. So
the biggest challenge that the companies and this council will have is they have very good financial reporting systems. They have absolutely appalling non-financial reporting systems. Because no one ever says, I bought so many bags of fertilizer which weighs 5 kilos and therefore total is 150 kilos of fertilizer we use. And that's what we need to get to. And then you need to decide what, I'm using fertilizer as an example, but what type of fertilizer could you use which doesn't have
like making your own compost out of the Christmas trees in the town or something like that,
Yes.
which we
Yes,
also
that's a
do.
very practical policy. I think the point that you're making, it's the difference in bounding net zero to the council and the council's operations and saying the whole of the town, isn't it? That's where it starts getting a bit wobbly. Because you're going to have a car club and those car club cars are electric cars, then if people from the council use an electric car to do council business for whatever reason, rather than using their own petrol cars, that's a quantifiable saving. Whereas once you say, well, we've got car club cars, which is great, it might take a car off the road, or it might mean that someone doesn't buy a second car. I mean, that's good, but it's a hell of a lot harder to quantify. I was going to say to Ken's point as well earlier about knowing how many electric charging points we need. I think it's a bit suck it and see, because it's going to depend on demand, isn't it? Part of the job should be assessing how well used the ones that we have are, and if there is demand, you put in more. It's very hard to be able to say, isn't it? And those two things are going to work together, because demand is going to be, if there's lots of charging points, that will stimulate demand because people see it's easier to be able to charge their car. But if there aren't enough charging points, then that will put people off. But part of the job of the council is to monitor that and to see how well used they are. I don't think you can say what the final figure is. It's just not going to be possible to know.
Yeah, but as a contractor, you know, putting 6 in there, it's probably just as easy to put 12 in. It's going to cost you another £5,000. But if you come back and put another 6 in, it's probably going to cost you another £40,000.
That's good.
I'm going to suggest we close the discussion at this point. I'm hearing all the comments you're making, and the speculation, and whether it's right to have a 2030 target or not. I accept, but I think we're where we're at, and I think what I would hope we can do is help committee chairs and officers understand and then move forward with it. It's not going to be easy, and it's a great shame that Fiona's not going to be around after the 13th of April, but it means that we have the role to take on far more in that respect. But I think there's a big risk, to be honest, of the council having set a 2030 policy and not having a delivery process in place. And that's a worry I've got. which I know Kelly heard me vocalise on. So let's move, if you're happy, let's move on from that and take it forward. Sorry.
So is the recommendation that you would like each committee to set a target, and for those targets,
And that we would help them identify how they can set the target.
okay, with support from this committee?
Yeah,
And they would report quarterly
yeah.
back to
On
us,
progress, yeah.
and we would summarise that report and make overarching recommendations for consideration by the full council.
I think so.
That sounds like
I think it's this working party should set the targets on each committee.
Wow.
I do too, only because I have no faith. Two of the committee chairs are on this committee,
Mm.
but I don't have faith. We are absolutely terrible at certain things, I think. And I think that's one of them. I think you almost, there's certain things you need to handheld, you know, like a little buddy system.
Yeah.
Someone from the committee shadows one of the chairs and hands them until it's
Well,
done.
can I put it this way? I think I would struggle to set a target for, say, recreation amenities. I could work with you to set the target.
That's what I mean, like maybe a buddy system or something.
Okay, right, sorry, I thought you said we should set it.
Well, yeah, Ken was saying that and I agreed with it, but a buddy system would work just as well.
Yeah.
Relying on a chair to do something on
Yeah.
top of
Yeah,
everything else, I just don't think it's
okay.
realistic.
Well, I think that would work,
Be fruitful.
but I don't think we have the knowledge to do it for the committees.
Yeah, we don't have the detailed knowledge that you have of how
Yeah,
all
if
the
you had a
ins and outs.
committee
of
member
the-
and a chair,
Yeah,
so someone working with Donna, someone working with Ian, someone working with Michelle, someone working with,
Yeah.
I've forgotten who the other chair, Glenn.
yeah,
Then,
yeah.
I won't tell you.
yeah. If you have someone working with each of them, and actually I would suggest maybe Henley and Bloom as well, because it's not a standing committee, but it's
Yeah,
a big committee that does maybe offset some. That's more helpful with the offsetting of,
I think at the moment, Tony, what you're saying is like you saying to Jackie, oh, can you go and build me a house? How long is it going to take?
well, I probably wouldn't ask her to do that.
I might be, yeah, that's quite good at it. It's, the bit that's missing is the how, and I think if there's collaboration, the how will start to come out of that, won't it, how to do
Donna and Ian, because they're on this committee, may need less help than say Michelle and Glenn who aren't on this committee. Don't have that.
But you're right.
Mm.
We're finding that.
And then, of course, by the time you sorted it all out, the chairs might change in there.
We've had that conversation.
But it's kind of why the how needs to be identified, isn't it? Because people do change.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that needs to
What
be
you
in
said
place.
before you came in was that Fiona will have allocated or separated out the carbon footprint by each committee before she leaves.
Why are you leaving again? Who allowed that?
Yes.
Has it been authorised?
You were not quick enough to stop it.
Okay, does that help? Yeah, everyone happy? We're going to tree strategy, please, if that's all right. And Fiona and Patrick, perhaps you'd like to give a verbal report?
Yeah, we had an excellent meeting today.
We did.
I think the experience I've had with Freakonomics, I went to a webinar when they did.
Freakonomics is a consultancy,
It's a
correct?
consultancy, yes, the consultancy that's been awarded the contract to help us to generate the data we need for the tree strategy from the surveys that have already been done by Mavencroft.
Yeah.
They've done an inventory and a survey of all the council's trees. And those
And
data.
some that don't belong to the council
Well,
too.
we'll include those as well, I'll take them. But we'll put those are in a Easy Tree database now. And Treeconomics have a tool which was developed by USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, for trees in the States. and has been worked on by Forestry Commission, or is it Forestry Research? And so they've introduced UK and European species as well. So it's been Europeanized. And it's a very good tool because what it does is identify from tree cover and the tree age. It identifies the stored carbon, but it also, which is really important for me, it identifies the fluxes. That's the uptake of carbon dioxide, and also what it gives out as well in terms of carbon dioxide, I think methane. So basically, they are very happy to work with us because we're going to pay them, but they're happy to work with us because it's really a not-for-profit organisation, because all the tool is developed, it's open source, so we don't have to pay a license for it. It means that many people in the council that are interested will be able to get access to the information that it generates. And what we specified is that it will tell us the stored carbon, which is actually pretty irrelevant until you cut it down. It will tell us if we can give them the maintenance information from Reading Borough Council reports, they can work out the amount of carbon dioxide given off by the tree work that's done and the maintenance work, the amount that's sucked in and sequestered due just simply to the trees growing each year. And also you can do futures, you can do forecasts. If we have just what we're doing now forecast, we can have a forecast of an active maintenance, which might be, we were discussing it today, say 4 saplings for every tree that's cut down. What would that do in terms of carbon footprint or carbon fluxes through year on year? And an aggressive and active one where you do something more like I'd like, which is increasing the number of trees that any town council has on its property over the years, and that we can then plug those scenarios in and report back that if we follow this policy, we'll use up or lose this much land, but we gain this much benefit in terms of carbon sequestration. So it's giving more accurate forecasting of what the work that we do will do for the carbon footprint.
Adding to that?
And the final, the findings of the work should be reported on Monday, the 11th of April. And so if members of this committee would like to attend to hear that, and also if you wanted to stay on for a briefing about the software tool that they've used, so that, because it's an open source, free to use piece of software, then.
Will you have park services part of that?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So park services will be involved in that also, and Patrick will be there for sure, but if others wanted to attend, I can
I've asked
send
that
them.
Kath joins us because I think there's one of the concerns I have, and it's something that we're going to have to address at some point, is that if you're going to plant woodland, you lose the amenity of the ground that you planted on. And so I think that will need to be considered by the council, and that's going to have to weigh up what it means in terms of land use and what is appropriate for the council, what the council wants to do as a whole. It's, you can't just sort of sneak these things in.
Well, you say that, but I mean, the last discussion we had on this was a couple of weeks ago. We were discussing the Jubilee. So we were discussing what to do with the schools, and we decided in the end we'd give them the options. We went to the schools, gave them the option of a coin, a sapling per child, which could be planted in their own garden or planted on town council land, and a tree with a plaque for each school to, Jubilee plaque. And so obviously that then led to a very minor, actually, discussion on where the trees could be planted. And I think a couple of minutes in, somebody said, Gilletsfield, that works. There's plenty of space up there for tree planting and stuff like that. So I know there should be more consideration for the large amount of tree planting that you're talking about. This is obviously a lot more.
Smaller,
Yeah, like 500 or something, as opposed to, you know, million.
Well, we're not going to plant a million. It's as simple as that. What I've taken on is a Chiltern-wide strategy for offsetting carbon, because we haven't got the land here in Henley. We can have a limited target for Henley of, say, 1,000 trees a year, and then have a major target for South Chilterns of 50,000 trees a year. Then the onus is on me or us to persuade the other councils that they would want to take more trees. Because that's moving beyond Henley Town land, because we don't have that much. We've got 5 square kilometres for the whole town, that's it.
This should be part of the discussion we have with the other parish councils.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's really important that that we engage with them. I've already engaged with Highmore.
Yeah.
I will try to engage with Stoke Row, and there's a couple of others.
If you engage with someone like, you know, Jo Robb,
Yes.
yeah, so
yes.
she's, you know, she's
She's a
obviously,
very useful.
and she covered what,
shepherd's
10, her
group.
and Lorraine covered like 10 parishes together or
Yes,
something.
yes,
Lorraine was there.
yeah. My problem is the number of hours that are in a day.
And same with her, she's currently away, so you won't get
Yeah.
much out of her for the next few weeks, but she's
She's
she's really keen on
Yeah,
stuff
I
like that.
agree. I mean, the things are going to hopefully get a bit quieter now, April, May, to find some time to. all right. Never happened. Yeah. No. I mean, we've been so busy with garden trees and with planting that March is really the end of that. But that's, I have to say, I'm really heartened by this, you know, the fact that we're tying up with economics. Because, to be honest, they're sort of preeminent, really.
Can you tell me, then this fits in with our current support, because as you'll be aware, over certainly, I don't know if so much the last year, but the year before, we spent a lot of money on our trees, on the tree management, on the software.
Yes.
Even just today, they were talking about the tree tablet, which is a special tablet devoted to the trees and checking them and monitoring them remotely and whatnot. All the staff have been on training. I mean, we spent a lot of money on trees, and so this it all fits in.
Luckily, they can extract all the information from Easy Trees, which is what they're running on for your tree management.
So it is. I think you said that.
It's an add-on. It's like an add-on really to it, which allows you to do your strategies and your planning on top of it, and then that can be fed back in.
Because I think if I had to go back to the committee and state the case for more money for tree software, I don't know if it would.
No, that's the great thing about this, it's free.
Oh,
I mean,
fantastic.
there's a £3,000 whatever, you know, that came before committee previously, so it's been agreed from this working group and the budget for that. But once we've done that, the great thing about this one is that you can just download and load that up on your laptop,
Oh, perfect.
and we can tap into the data.
Yeah, the council's choice of Easy Tree was made it very straightforward to get the data that we need to do carbon calculations. So that's all worked really well.
Sorry, I should have been going through the chair as well. That's rude.
That's all right.
Carried away.
Any other comments or questions about the tree strategy? And could you actually perhaps notify the time and place of the
Yes,
April 11th meeting?
I'll send those details around to everybody.
So,
You mentioned about the Jubilee and the tree planting. Is that covered by your tree Patrick?
No.
As it is, or
No, it's not actually. That's a good point, actually. I could add those into the tree numbers.
Let me, I'll add you, I'll give you the numbers, I've got them somewhere. Not all of the schools chose saplings, half the schools chose saplings. Half chose.
And that would be
pines.
interesting to know which ones didn't.
Well, Trinity definitely chose saplings, I know that because
Oh,
he
brilliant.
did St Trinity. But I can't remember the others, sorry, I'll have to check.
Great.
do you know, it'd be interesting to know how many children chose a tree rather than a corn?
Children didn't get a choice, it was in the teachers, yeah.
So every pupil in a Henley school.
We did offer to Gillett's, but Gillett's didn't respond, so I don't think Gillett's are going to get anything but their set school tree. No. I'll find it, what I'll do is I'll forward the number.
Lovely, thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Let's then go on to the decarbonisation, which Councillor Arlett is reading currently, so therefore would you like to start commenting? No, that's not fair, sorry. No, don't worry about
Well, looking at the figures, shall we look at the figures first,
No,
or do we just disregard the figures?
Yeah, I think Tony, you better report on that.
We're going to ask Fiona to talk, first of all, this paper. I'm happy to talk about the figures afterwards. And perhaps we should switch off the hour time. But Fiona, would you like to comment first?
Yes, thank you. So your pack includes the final report from Avico on the renewable energy feasibility study. So this is a feasibility study on energy saving and renewable energy for 6 of the council sites, including the town hall. And you've got a report covering that paper with recommendations. I suppose we started off with the 6 buildings really with kind of a blank sheet of paper for each one. What can we do to save energy here? What are the possibilities for renewable energy? And what this report achieves is a short list of energy saving and renewable energy projects that then need to be looked at further. And thank you to everybody who attended the workshop that we had on the 10th of March, wasn't it? And contributed and asked questions then. The working group have put forward lots of questions about the accuracy of some of the figures. And a few of those are updated now in the final report. But it's important to be clear that these figures, we wouldn't recommend using those for a business case. They're not precise enough, I would say, to make a business case, but they are sufficient to say, okay, these are the priority things that the council can look at further. So my successor will, can start doing all the work on that if you're happy that these are the things to take forward. So the recommendation that I suggest is starting with energy saving measures as the start point. So we should, the saving measures identified in column 2 of table 2 in the report is quite a long list, so I won't go through them all. Should be developed further and implemented if they're appropriate. And that should be done before the renewable energy generation is installed. So this would include things like secondary double glazing for some of the windows in the town hall that don't already have them. About half do and half don't. We think the others should be covered. And also working with leaseholders to find funding for roof insulation improvements and cavity wall insulation, thermostatic radiator valves, those kind of things. But there's a detailed list in the report. The second point in the recommendation is about then moving on to renewable energy generation once it's been worked out what can be done with energy saving measures. And my suggestion is the council should further investigate solar PV panels on the town hall, Lightingham Pavilion and Runner Hall, and air source heat pumps for the pavilion and the old fire station gallery. Now with the town hall, Tony's gathered some further information by getting a quote from a highly reputable company, and they have a concern about the type of roof that we have on the town hall. So their advice is, and I'll get technical very briefly, but you can't use a ballasted mounting to fit solar panels, which is the kind of mounting you would normally use, and that's because of the particular solar panel roof that we've got. So this method couldn't be used. We'd have to see whether there was something else, and And I don't know if there is another way of attaching solar panels that could be used, but I think it would be very wise to, given that concerns around the visibility of the solar panels have given us hope that there's at least a feasibility that it could get planning permission. And you've got a paragraph in your report which the planning officer has written, so she sets it out very carefully and precisely. You're familiar with the process, and the application would have to go through the planning system, and there's no guarantee by any means at all that we would get permission. But because the site is not visible from a main elevation, there's reason to hope that planning permission might be given. So that being the case, and if a technical solution could be found, there is potentially a way forward, but it's not, there's not an easy, straightforward way of doing this, but it's a question of, my advice to you anyway would be keep it on the table at this point, because there is the possibility of working out a solution to having solar power generation in the town hall. So just to repeat, the council should further investigate solar PV on the town hall, the Lightlingham Pavilion and Brunner Hall, and air source heat pumps for the pavilion and the old fire station gallery. You're right there.
Yeah, apologies, it's
No,
a
no,
dry
it's
throat, it was in there, it was a nightmare as well.
Oh my gosh, sorry.
We didn't have water.
Oh, okay. So the third of the 4 points of my recommendation is I've seen an opportunity, as I'm inclined to do, for biodiversity enhancement. And the roof on the church in Marlow has peregrine falcons nesting at the moment. They have now laid their first egg, which I think is very exciting. And it's something that Henley could encourage by creating a nesting platform area for peregrine falcons in Henley. And the fact that they're in the area around gives the prospect that they might nest on the town hall roof, which would be a wonderful achievement to have, and would help knock the pigeon population on the head as well. Other people might
The massacre
so
marketplace.
The third point of my recommendation is that roof access for installation of solar panels should be used as an opportunity to install a peregrine falcon nesting platform on the town hall and other biodiversity enhancements as appropriate. So just to note that the building works may create opportunities for biodiversity enhancements that could be considered as part of this work.
It's a heavily sounded listening to this. The policy could be headline, the main headline this week.
It's the public can be listening, so anybody may hear. And the final point is around this concept.
Is this your leaving present, by the way?
Yes. The final point is around a virtual power plant, which is a concept we're all just kind of starting to get to know. But where we have sites that produce more energy than they consume themselves, there is a possibility for other buildings to use that energy in order to reduce the overall impact of the councils from energy from fossil fuels by taking it from its own solar power generation. And as a general concept, that's called a virtual power plant. Now, there are different ways of sharing the energy generated at one site renewably with another site, and that still has to be worked out, but that does seem like an important potential way for the council to maximise the energy that it produces renewably and offsets within its own estate. So my recommendation is that the virtual power plant is also included for further investigation.
Could you give an example? I think it would be very helpful. They did share or developed an example in the meeting. The Brunner Hall, for instance, has got a large south-facing roof and could generate a lot of energy in the middle of the day when it's probably not used, And that could be exported to the town hall. Town hall could consume that energy.
But we looked into all of this. I remember it very vividly because Ian Riceman and I were the only two councillors that voted in favour of it, which meant it fell. We voted, I think we couldn't get the thing for the town hall anyway at the time. But when it came to like Premium Pavilion, and they were talking about us selling it back to the grid, how much you, and all of this sort of stuff as well.
I mean, the great thing about this is that you sell back to the grid typically at 4p to 5p kilowatt hour at the moment. That's all you get. And we're already paying 17 or more pence a kilowatt hour here for it. And so there's a potential to discount that. There is a service charge, I'm sure. You don't get things for free, but that still there's a lot of margin there. There's 12p a kilowatt hour margin. And even if you got 10p of it, it'd be great.
Well, even if we weren't selling it, you can't make the Lightning Pavilion any uglier either. So absolutely lost on me. Why wouldn't you supply electricity to it at the same time? It's really, you know,
Yeah, I
nice
mean,
on
because
that.
the Lightning Pavilion is another one that has south facing because it's a
And they're
hexagon.
slanted, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a hexagon or not, but it's got
8 sides.
8.
Thank you.
But it's got sides that will face all of these. So it'll be generating from early morning right the way through to the evening. And that could be exported to another.
Maybe that's what it was built.
Yeah. And the figures in the report need looking at in more detail to create a business case. There's no doubt about that, but there's still the possibility of taking that forward. So.
Any questions, comments? No? Okay, let me give some insight into Patrick's comments and Fiona's comment about my comments on costs. As I think you might know, I'm chair of the Community Energy Society. We've got 24 buildings with solar panels on, including things like the Museum of English Rural Life and the Central Library. And I saw some of the costs for solar panels that they put forward, and I went, wow. So I got alternative quotes. They are about between 75% less, sorry, 75% of what's in the document and 50% of what's in the document. And the interesting thing also, if you look at Pavilion, is that they are assuming, I believe, that they'll put panels all around the pavilion, which is great, apart from part of it faces north. So there'll be no benefit at all.
Could do rainwater capture that side, couldn't we?
Rainwater capture, yeah, very good idea. The other thing that is, they've used government data on price of energy, which certainly for electricity is not in line with what the council is paying currently. The council is paying more. So therefore the savings will be greater, although the costs, for example, of solar panels will be less as well. But I think Fiona said that we need to look more carefully at the calculations. I think this is a good start, but I think it has to be something that we as a group go into in more detail. And certainly I'm 100% in agreement about getting the energy savings measures in first of all, because otherwise, if you don't do that first, you put on air source heat pumps or solar panels, and you are over providing because you've saved the energy through other sources. The other thing that I think is important to recognise is that this is just looking at 6 buildings, and we ought to be looking at the assets in council. So there are strips of land that might actually be subject of trees strategy, but they're also capable of having solar arrays on it. And if you take the concept of what it's been described as a virtual power plant, then that would be one way of actually saving creating energy that can be used for the council. The other thing is that the council has got solar panels already on buildings. It's got ones at 353, 357, and also the over 60 club. 357 has got 60 panels on it. Patrick and I went there to try and identify if they had an export meter. There isn't any export meter there. And what we're recommending is that the council should take on board what's called an informal export meter, which means that it doesn't necessarily have to declare that we're measuring the exporting to the grid, to the SSE or whoever it is. Once we know how much is being exported, we can then see, because all of these sites were built with feed-in tariff, and that is assuming 50% deemed export. But it actually can be quite a profitable enterprise, and therefore what we can do then is decide, is it worthwhile exporting to the town hall, as distinct from just leaving it there and exporting to the grid, but that's say 20 pence a kilowatt hour. I think the virtual power plant is an interesting example. Fiona said that it can be a variety of forms, so it could be just that we would move it from say 357 to the town hall in what's called a sleeved arrangement, or on an off-site power purchase agreement. But if we are able to find that we've got enough generation capability, then what we can do is provide it also to the schools, sell it to the schools and so forth. It's different from them having to look at put on their own solar panels. So I think this is a starter. I think it's a useful exercise. I think we've all had comments about what it covered and what it didn't. Certainly, I think Claudia was talking about the extent to which you're looking at the building fabric, first of all. And I think that's a well-made point, and that is addressed through looking at energy saving measures, first of all. What we have to be careful about is we don't make decisions based on some of the calculations made in those tables, but actually take it and drill down further and be clear that what we're actually saying is something that is both profitable for the council and also delivering carbon emissions. But what is unlikely to happen is that we will actually achieve net zero just through this. This is not going to deliver a lot. And let me ask you a question. Which of the buildings in the council owns do you think has got the highest electricity consumption?
Someone?
Have you got the answer to this?
Of course I have. Another question.
Well, that's why I
Well,
thought.
I'm excited to know.
That's why I never answered it.
It's the pavilion.
Oh, right, okay, yeah.
It's about double the town hall. Now, either there's a real error there, a failure. I go past it with my dog every morning, and there's this fan blowing out at 7 o'clock in the morning. The lights are on the toilet, but actually they've just got lights.
Lights on the outside as well.
Yeah, but not enough. And the night time, there are two rates that the council, town hall, and the lighting pavilion operate on. One is a night rate, and the other is a day rate. The day rate is 7 o'clock till 12 o'clock, till 7 o'clock in the morning to midnight. The night rate is midnight through to 7 o'clock. And if you look at what lighting pavilion is using in night, it's massive.
Is it the fridge in the nursery? There's at least 3 fridges in the bowling club there. There's got to be.
What I'm saying is that we need to, comes back to the point about what is the energy saving measures, first of all. Energy saving can also mean making certain the systems work properly. And I
Yeah,
don't know what it
absolutely.
is.
Question, does it have storage?
Yeah. That's part of the nighttime thing.
And does it have air conditioning?
No.
It has fans.
It has fans.
We discussed that, didn't we? It's a rather hot building, actually, so.
But the Bowls Club always keep the heating on. I know that much. It's always
What,
warm.
all the time?
Yeah, on the low end. We had a conversation about it really randomly, like, I don't know, one of the last events we went to, sometimes we go for bowls games and suppers and stuff, and,
I mean, they do pay for their electricity.
yeah,
They don't
they're
pay.
right.
Okay, but even in the summer, they're heating on.
There's a specific reason, but I just don't remember off the top of my head, but you speak to someone like Sally or Norman, you know, there's
They need warm hands when they're bowling.
yeah, the average membership is slightly older.
Slightly
that's
older,
to be
yeah.
said, yeah.
No offence.
Yeah.
But looking at those kind of things then, who's going to do that? Because that's something we can do straight away, right? And we talked about this, didn't we? Usage and behaviour. Who should be the ones tackling that? Should that be our working group?
Yes, they should.
Are you looking at me?
Because where you've got legal agreements like tenancies, you've got inertia because until you renegotiate that, there's very little you can do legally. You can encourage, but you can't actually enforce. So I think it's going to take one very frustrating stage and then one much more positive stage.
Well, I think it's actually easier because there'll be a direct incentive for them to engage, right? If we were paying the bill, then it would be harder because they're paying their own bill. Then it's going to be made easier, that discussion.
One of the problems is that they pay the bill and the council receives the income. But we would put the energy saving measures in.
Yeah, but I was talking about behaviour, so turning things off, by investigating why the night consumption is so high.
Yeah.
Are the fans on and the wind, you know?
I would imagine a decent electrician, if you employed him for a couple of days, would give the answer to that.
Yeah.
I wonder if they think that it's cheaper to keep the heating on all the time. Some people still think that.
Martin Lewis did say that to people, but I thought he meant homes. I'm not sure he quite meant community halls or
Yeah,
clubs or anything, but he did say, he said something to that effect.
yeah. I mean, it would be good to just, I mean, this is just a straight behavioural change, of course, there's nothing to.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah.
Well, I think it needs to be explored. In terms of building decarbonisation, though, my recommendation is that we welcome the report as it stands, recognise that there are areas that need to be worked on quite a lot, but that it's a good start, and actually we should look beyond it. So, you know, things like the informal export meters, at least let's understand what is being generated in the solar panels that the council's already got.
I suppose I know that you've been feeding back your comments to Bingo. Have they understood and appreciated kind of the points that you're making, like to help them build a robust?
I'd rather not comment on that.
So that's, I just find that hugely fascinating when they pitch themselves to being such a sustainable organisation. Yes.
Would you like to comment on that? Might be easier for you to comment as you.
They won the tender, didn't they?
They did, yes, and we reviewed the options. I think they provided a report that complies with the requirements for a rural community energy fund project. But a lot of the details that we'll need for a business case are not yet there. Let me leave it to that.
Thank you. I think that the second point was around behaviour change, and the things that we talked about, how we can help the users who, I don't know what the right word is, has tenancy in the buildings that we own, the council own rather, like that could be a really useful conversation to keep going, not just with the pavilion, but it's those simple things around how do we raise awareness, how do we raise, you know, how can you, easy wins to make some energy savings, like we're all going to feel the pinch at the end of the month with energy prices going up, I'm sure there'll be a lot of appreciation about how do you review your energy usage? You know, why are the things on all night? So I think anything we can do to help reduce and encourage energy saving would be really good. My final point is based on your point, Fiona, about the use of beautiful language of enhancing biodiversity when we have solar panel installations. The thought I had was, how can we apply that across any planning application? You know, how do we include biodiversity enhancements such as swift boxes or something when there is building work happening? How do we extend that? a bit
You
wider?
can't really
Not saying that
do it,
swift
can you?
boxes
Oh,
is going to
against
be the
the
right thing.
No, it's
But-
out of our control, unfortunately. That's, well, we're fortunate in
Put it on the
that.
agenda.
But
It depends what the policies are.
yeah, it's it that we're now, the neighbourhood plan, which covers the different changes to the planning policy that's specific to Hendon, is with Oxford District Council with the examiner? No, it's on its way to the examiner. So it's with SODC, and they are the planning authority, so ultimately it's what they say that goes.
Got no
we-
influence that.
Well, we've done that. We've done what we can. And the neighbourhood planning group has done that. We've kind of made our play, sent in the report, and it's kind of, there's little or nothing that we can do now, except, yeah, there's little or nothing. we can do.
Ken obviously knows way more about planning than I could ever even hope to know 10% of, but with that, when you're refusing an application, or you're saying no to something because it has to be a legitimate planning reason, so you can't just say because it hasn't got, you know, biodiversity or whatever, it's not fitting in with our plan unless it's part of the neighbourhood plan, like Ken says. But when it comes to council making decisions, that is part of every council decision that's made in general. It's just when it comes to plans, hands are tied. Even as SODC plans, Ken's still not in a position to be able to change the rules.
Policies are policies. You know, we tried to uplift some of the policies through our plan, which hopefully they'll be accepted. But at the end of the day, SODC have policies, as national policies, and this is why a lot of these applicants are so good getting around the policies, because they normally finish up with national ones, and that's what we get planning permission for. So we can't come up with a set of policies which you may want to do. They just won't be accepted by us.
We've done our best.
Well, so I'm saying, we've got bits and pieces in there which we're hoping they're going to miss.
The problem with SODC as well is that, oh sorry, it's like jumping in front, but SODC got in trouble, what was it, 3-4 years ago, because what was happening is that their decisions were being appealed and the percentage got too high and so basically then if SODC start messing around and not giving those legal decisions, making them legally, then they will lose the power to decide, and it will be somebody sat centrally who hasn't even been to South Oxfordshire making decisions about South Oxfordshire. So they're pretty bound, their hands are tied, even with the best will in the world.
Good.
Yes, I just want to go back to your comments about user change and tenants of the council, and to say that when we organised a tour of the 6 sites as part of this project, the building tenants were all very helpful and gave up their time to talk to the consultants as they went round. So if further conversations were had, I think we're pushing at an open draft-proof door already.
Their interest, isn't it?
So they were really interested, and in some cases it would save them money. In others, it was just something that they were interested in trying to help with. So.
Yeah, a couple of things. So with these users, would there be a benefit in getting them into one room together and for us to present to them a high-level summary of the report in order to inform them as to what they can do right now, what their usage is, how they could influence it right now.
Yeah.
And also as an immediate next step, just to confirm what Tony already said, I think it's really important that we put everything in place to measure accurately usage from now on, because some of the data has still don't look quite right to me, and make someone responsible for monitoring and tracking and reporting on it. And then the other thing I wanted to ask, what, apart from those immediate next steps, what would be following on now from this report? Is there now going to be a step whereby an X amount will be made available and will be spent, and how are we going to then prioritise where to spend it first? That was a question.
Okay.
Good.
So in terms of following up with the tenants, I wouldn't recommend trying to get them all together for a meeting, because they're each very much focused on their day-to-day business, and I think they would just really struggle to find the time. For example, think of the nursery, you know, they're very busy sorting out the children day to day. They don't really have the capacity to take a couple of hours out in the middle of the day to come and talk about their energy bill. You know, I just don't think that's quite the best way to work with them in any case. So I would suggest a more one-on-one approach, and there aren't very many of them, and the council approaches them for other reasons and other discussions, so there might be better opportunities to use those than to try and organise a big meeting for everybody. So as for what happens next, so this recommendation will go up to the council through the planning committee. There's no particular budget allocated for these works over and above the operational day-to-day expenditure, you know, of the committees. So it's up to the council then to decide what further work is needed. But given there's quite a lot of business case work to be done first, I'm not sure you're at the point to be setting budgets for this as yet.
Well, we're on to the other points. The other points as well.
Yeah,
Okay,
that was
well,
it.
fair enough. Okay.
No, I've lost my thread. Well, the first one is positive.
It's age.
Yeah, I know.
Age.
Yeah, the positive thing is that the town clerk was in the previous meeting. He felt confident that if you took Tony's figures, business case could be made, and that it would be looked upon by the town council as a very good strategic investment. So I think that that's the right way of doing it. I know what my first point was, which is, should this go forward with some sort of a set of words from Tony, so that people aren't disheartened by the fact that it looks at first sight as if none of this is worth doing. You know, for instance, there could be retrofitting, or it could be the PV, or whatever it is. It doesn't really make the case. They've gone for worst cases, haven't they? They've gone for paying retail rates for PV and that sort of thing, which I think might, if it goes forward, if someone was just glancing at that, they might be disappointed by it.
Well, what the recommendation says is to further develop and implement the energy saving measures in table 2. So that's quite long.
That's good.
So that seems like quite
That's
positive, clear.
Yeah.
And then specifically to investigate solar PV on the town hall, pavilion and Borough Hall, and air source heat pumps on the pavilion and the old fire station gallery. Now those seem like big positive steps forward for my successor to look into.
Yes.
So
Just as long as they don't look at the figures in the report, we're all right then. Really.
as long as it's understood that, don't base it on those costs, for example.
Well, that's
Well, hang on a
Because
second.
you are, but-
Will the paper go with your recommendations? Will you?
I think you need to put Fiona's report and the VCO report on the next
Yes.
planning agenda.
Yes,
Okay.
I think it needs to be framed by
Yeah.
your report.
Are you already working with Basti with?
He's starting on the 12th of April, just a couple of days before I leave. So I won't have a huge amount of time with him, but yeah, the handover document is growing. So
Tony, can we vote this through? Because of all things, I've got to go to a
really?
planning training tonight. I've got a meeting.
I think we've finished on the discussion,
Yeah.
to be honest.
So do you want to vote this through?
Pardon?
Do you want to vote this through?
Yes, please. We're happy to go forward with the proposal that Fiona's put forward. Yeah. So then is the date of next meeting?
I wanted to suggest, thinking about the town meeting, at which point, well, I mean the annual meeting, don't I? At which point the committees will be re-established. It was quite helpful if this working group can meet quite quickly after that meeting to elect your chair and things going forward. So the annual meeting's on the 9th of May, I think I've got that right, Kath. So I was going to suggest Thursday, the 19th of May, because the new projects officer works on a Thursday routinely, so that might be a good day. And if 3:30 suits people
Do
again.
we not all lose our jobs? Don't we have to wait until we're reconstituted before? we can
But that will happen on the 9th of May. You'll be reappointed as, yeah, so the 9th.
It'll be a planning committee after the 9th of May.
Oh, okay.
That will ask you whether you want to stay on it.
So it is, yes, I was going to say, I thought there was a delay the last time.
So planning's on the 10th of May.
Oh,
So-
that's easy.
So Thursday, the 19th, I was thinking, yeah, the week.
Thursday the 19th at 3:30.
And
Yeah.
at this stage, we'll be face to face.
Yes.
Right, thank you very much, everyone, for all your contribution and participation. Sorry.
Do we say anything at the meeting on the 31st, this town hall meeting?
Town meeting.
Is there
Town
a
meeting.
representation?
Sorry?
Is there CEWG representation?
Have you written a report for it?